My name is Winter, and I'm the birthday girl in 3 days, and I'm guaranteed to be the drunkest.
Winter Straw had everything going for her. At just 25 years old, she was intelligent, accomplished, and respected by those who knew her. She had built a career dedicated to helping others, earned recognition as a standout athlete, and carried herself with a confidence that made people take notice. She was the type of person who lifted those around her, someone who inspired without even trying. So, when deputies responded to a crisis call at a quiet apartment complex in Columbia, South Carolina on the evening of March 26, 2023, no one could have imagined the horror that awaited them. The scene they walked into was devastating. A young woman, unresponsive, lying just outside the building, her life stolen in an instant. Within moments, authorities realized that what had unfolded here was no random act of violence. As law enforcement worked to secure the scene, they quickly learned this case was far from over. A tense standoff was underway. The suspect, someone close to Winters, someone no one had expected, was still inside, armed, and refusing to surrender. For nearly 3 hours, negotiators did everything in their power to bring a peaceful end to the situation. Then, suddenly, the line went silent. What happened inside that apartment would only deepen the tragedy, sending shockwaves through an entire community. The truth behind Winter Straw's final moments would leave family, friends, and those who followed her promising career in disbelief. How did a woman so full of life, with so much ahead of her, become the victim of such a brutal crime? And why did no one see it coming? Winter Straw wasn't just another name in the crowd. She was the kind of person people gravitated toward. She had a natural magnetism, an energy that made her stand out in any room. Her friends described her as driven and full of life, someone who never did anything halfway. Whether it was on the basketball court, in the classroom, or in her career, she gave everything her all. She was the definition of potential. Brilliant, ambitious, and determined to make an impact. Born and raised in Columbia, South Carolina, Winter grew up in a tight-knit family that encouraged her to dream big. She attended Columbia High School, where she quickly made a name for herself as a talented athlete. But her abilities stretched far beyond sports. She was equally as dedicated to her education, balancing academics and athletics with ease. She had a sharp mind, a competitive spirit, and a natural ability to lead, traits that would follow her throughout her life. After high school, Winter earned a spot at Allen University, where she continued to push herself to new heights. She wasn't just another student. She was an athlete, a scholar, and a young woman with a vision for her future. She played on both the volleyball and basketball teams, proving her versatility and discipline. But it was on the basketball court that she truly shined. In 2016, she was a key player on Allen University's women's basketball team, which made history by winning the first ever AII Conference Championship. It was a moment of triumph, a reflection of the hard work she had put in, and one of the many highlights in her young life. But Winter wasn't just focused on personal success. She had a deep sense of loyalty to the people and places that shaped her. Even after she graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Social Science with a concentration in pre-law in 2020, she remained involved in the Allen University community. She was a familiar face at home games, cheering on the players who had come after her, offering guidance and support. She knew what it took to succeed, and she wanted others to feel that same sense of achievement. Her passion for giving back extended beyond the university. Winter was an active member of the Gamma Pi chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Inc., a prestigious sisterhood known for its commitment to public service and social action. She embodied the values of the sorority: leadership, dedication, and a desire to uplift others. She didn't just wear the letters, she lived by them. It was that same selflessness that led her to her career. Winter chose a path that few were brave enough to take. She became a mental health officer at the South Carolina Department of Corrections. She worked at the Broad Rivers Secure Facility, where she provided behavioral and mental health support to some of the most troubled inmates in the system. It was a job that required patience, resilience, and the ability to see people beyond their mistakes. Not everyone is capable of walking into a prison every day, working with individuals whose society had written off, and still believing in the power of rehabilitation, but Winter did. Her dedication didn't go unnoticed. Colleagues respected her, officials admired her, and those she worked with knew she was making a difference. South Carolina Department of Corrections Director Brian Sterling described her as the epitome of a dedicated officer, someone who cared deeply about her work and the people she served. She was the kind of person who was destined for greater things, the kind of person who would have left a legacy in whatever field she chose.
Running late for dinner, but get ready with us. Well, more so like an outfit of the day. Purse, Forever 21, bodysuit, Charlotte Russe, skirt, Sheen. I don't have no shoes on, but some sandals. Come on, baby.
Shirt, ABP,
Billionaire boys.
Billionaire Boys, shorts, baby, socks, ABP.
You know what it's Yo, clearly she was taking care of him too. He can't even name what he got on. You know she bought that whole outfit for him. He don't look, he can't even tell you what's it. Shorts, my baby.
Horses, sorry, it's Foot Locker.
At just 25 years old, Winter Straw had already accomplished so much. She had proven her strength, her intelligence, and her heart. She had built a foundation for a future that should have been long and fulfilling. But none of that mattered on the evening of March 26, 2023, because in a matter of moments, everything she had worked for, everything she had planned, was taken away. The life she had built was cut short in the most violent way imaginable. And the most chilling part? No one saw it coming. What really happened inside that apartment complex? How did a young woman with so much promise become the victim of such a senseless act? And who, exactly, was Renardo Johnson, the man who had been by her side, the man who had once been seen as her protector? The answers to those questions would leave a community shaken and reveal a heartbreaking truth about the dangers that can hide in plain sight. Winter Straw had a life that many would envy, a fulfilling career, a strong support system, and a future filled with possibilities. But for those who followed her journey, there was another aspect of her life that stood out: her relationship with Renardo Johnson. The two had been together for years, and by all appearances their bond was solid. To friends, family, and those who watched from the outside, they seemed happy. Social media was filled with moments of their love, playful videos, inside jokes, and the kind of connection that made others believe they had something real. Relationships like theirs are often held up as examples of what love should look like. They laughed together, supported each other, and created memories that were documented for the world to see. Winter and Renardo weren't just dating. They were a couple who shared their journey openly, letting others in on their highs and lows. In one of their most popular TikTok videos, they answered a series of questions about their relationship, revealing tidbits about their dynamic. Who was more protective? Who ate the most? Who spent the most money? And who loved the hardest? The way they looked at each other in those clips gave no indication that trouble was looming. If anything, Renardo seemed devoted to Winter.
Who was interested first? Who said I love you first? Who's more protective? Who cleans more? Who eats the most? Who spends the most money? Who is most likely to start an argument? Who falls asleep first? Who is more annoying? Who loves the hardest?
When she was involved in a serious car accident in 2022, he was right there by her side, helping her through the difficult recovery process. He was the one holding her up when she needed support, the one reassuring her that she would get back on her feet. For someone as independent and strong-willed as Winter, having someone in her corner meant everything. And Renardo played that role perfectly. To the people around them, their relationship was secure. There were no obvious red flags, no public fights, no signs of distress. Winter's mother, LaShawn Williams, had welcomed Renardo into their family. She had looked him in the eyes, spoken to him as a mother does when entrusting her daughter to someone else's care. She had told him directly, "I'm giving you my child, wholehearted and bubbly, and that's how I want to get her back." And every time he assured her that he would never hurt Winter. So what changed? What went so terribly wrong in the months leading up to March 26, 2023? In cases like these, people always look back, searching for something they might have missed. A clue, a shift in behavior, a moment that didn't feel right at the time but now seems glaringly obvious. But for those closest to Winter, there was nothing. No bruises, no whispered concerns, no distant behavior.
Silky booty, go on and get in the camera. Yeah, this is for Keisha because you clearly ain't learned your lesson the first time. Tell her what I said. Louder.
I can't with you no more.
Cause what?
You messing up my family.
Nah.
She wasn't withdrawing from friends or family. If she was suffering in silence, she had hidden it well. And yet, on that fateful evening, everything unraveled. The home they once shared, the space where their love had seemingly flourished, became the setting for a tragedy no one could have imagined. The very man Winter had trusted, the man who had stood by her during her toughest moments, was now at the center of a crime so devastating it would send shockwaves through an entire community. The question that remained was, why? What happened between Winter Straw and Renardo Johnson that led to such a violent conclusion? And how does a relationship that once seemed so full of love and promise end in the worst way possible? The events of that night were just beginning to unfold, and as investigators began to piece together the truth, they would uncover a reality more devastating than anyone could have anticipated. The evening of March 26, 2023 was supposed to be like any other Sunday in Columbia, South Carolina. The city had settled into its usual rhythm, people unwinding after the weekend, preparing for the week ahead. But at approximately 6 o'clock that evening, a call came through to the Richland County Sheriff's Department. The urgency in the dispatcher's voice signaled that this wasn't just another routine domestic disturbance. This was something far more severe. Officers rushed to an upscale apartment complex on Mallet Hill Road, a quiet residential area lined with well-maintained buildings and neatly kept lawns. But behind the walls of one of those apartments, something terrible had happened. As deputies approached, their attention was immediately drawn to a horrifying sight. Just outside the entrance of one of the buildings, a young woman lay motionless, multiple gunshot wounds, no signs of life. The victim was quickly identified as 25-year-old Winter Straw. The bright, accomplished, and beloved young woman who had dedicated her life to helping others was now gone. The scene was chaotic, but one thing was certain: this was no accident. Someone had pulled the trigger. Someone had made the decision to end her life in cold blood. As officers tried to piece together what had unfolded, new information emerged. This wasn't just a tragic case of gun violence. There was still an active threat inside the apartment. A man, later confirmed to be 27-year-old Renardo Johnson, had barricaded himself inside. The same man Winter had loved, the same man who had once stood beside her, was now at the center of an unfolding crisis. Armed and refusing to surrender, he was locked in a tense standoff with law enforcement. For nearly 3 hours, trained negotiators took turns speaking with him, their voices steady but firm. They urged him to come out peacefully, to put down his weapon, to let this end without more loss of life. Those who have handled these situations before know that time is critical. The longer a standoff drags on, the more unpredictable it becomes. Renardo responded in short, clipped sentences. His voice was tense, his words evasive. Officers pressed him, trying to break through the emotional walls he had built around himself. They asked what had happened, why this had escalated to such a horrific degree, but the answers never came. Then, at approximately 9 o'clock, the air went still. The line that had been open for hours, filled with back-and-forth negotiations with desperate attempts to de-escalate, suddenly went silent. No more words, no more responses. Seconds later, a sound shattered the tense quiet. A single gunshot fired from inside the apartment. Officers stormed in, their weapons drawn, their instincts sharp. They found Renardo slumped on the floor, a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the upper body. He was still breathing, but barely. Paramedics rushed him to a nearby hospital, fighting to keep him alive. But despite their efforts, he was pronounced dead shortly after arriving. The reality of what had transpired began to sink in. 2 young lives, once intertwined in love, had now ended in unthinkable tragedy. One by violence, the other by his own hand. But while the standoff was over, the questions were only beginning. What had led to this final, irreversible moment? Had there been warning signs that everyone missed? And most importantly, what happened in the hours leading up to that fatal encounter? As investigators sifted through evidence, spoke to witnesses, and examined the fractured remains of what had once been a seemingly happy relationship, they would begin to uncover the deeper truth, a truth that would haunt those who loved Winter Straw forever. As dawn broke over Columbia, South Carolina on March 27, 2023, the reality of what had happened the night before settled in. A promising life was gone, a community was in mourning, and investigators were left to make sense of a tragedy that, on the surface, made no sense at all. The crime scene at the apartment complex on Mallet Hill Road was still fresh. Yellow police tape wrapped around the area, officers moving carefully as they documented every possible clue. They combed through the unit where Renardo Johnson had barricaded himself, searching for answers in the remnants of what had once been a shared home. The walls, the floors, the scattered belongings. Each detail held the potential to explain what led to this moment. Forensic teams worked methodically, cataloging shell casings, examining blood spatter patterns, and attempting to reconstruct the sequence of events. How many shots were fired? Where had Winter been standing when the first bullet struck? Was there any indication of a struggle? These were the questions that would help piece together her final moments. Meanwhile, investigators turned to those who knew the couple best. They needed to understand what had been happening behind closed doors. Had there been arguments leading up to that night? Did Winter ever confide in anyone about trouble in the relationship? If there were signs, why hadn't anyone noticed? Winter's family was left reeling. Her mother, LaShawn Williams, had trusted Renardo. She had welcomed him into their lives, believing that he cared for her daughter. The betrayal was unbearable. She struggled to understand how someone she had looked in the eyes, someone who had promised to protect Winter, could be the same person responsible for taking her life. In interviews with authorities, family and friends repeated the same sentiment. There were no warnings, no reports of abuse, no visible signs that Winter was in danger. She hadn't withdrawn from those closest to her. She hadn't expressed fear. By all accounts, she had been living her life as usual, focused on her career, her goals, and her future. But domestic violence doesn't always look the way people expect it to. Sometimes there are no bruises, no obvious fights, no desperate cries for help. Sometimes it exists in ways that only the victim understands, ways that remain hidden until it's too late. As detectives analyzed messages, phone records, and surveillance footage from the apartment complex, they sought anything that could give them clarity. Had there been a confrontation earlier in the day? Was this a moment of sudden rage, or had it been premeditated? One of the most chilling aspects of this case was that Winter's murder was not an act of random violence. It wasn't the result of a break-in, a robbery gone wrong, or a dispute between strangers. It was an intimate crime, one committed by someone she had loved, someone she had trusted. The circumstances left everyone wondering what had changed. How does a man who had once stood by Winter during her toughest moments, a man who had been there for her in times of need, turn into the person who would take everything from her? Authorities worked tirelessly to piece together the answers, but for those left behind, there was no resolution that could undo the pain. Winter's loved ones were forced to accept a reality that no family should ever have to face. Their daughter, sister, and friend was gone, and the man responsible would never have to answer for what he had done. Yet even as the investigation continued, one undeniable fact remained. Winter's death was more than a tragic end to a promising life. It was a stark reminder of the unseen dangers of domestic violence, a reality that, for many, is only recognized when it's too late. But for Winter's family, her story wasn't going to end here. They would make sure of that. The news of Winterstraw's death spread quickly, and with it came a wave of disbelief that rippled through Columbia, South Carolina. The city had lost a young woman full of promise, a woman who had given so much of herself to others, only to have her own life stolen in an act of senseless violence. Her family was shattered, her friends were in shock, and those who had worked alongside her struggled to grasp the devastating truth. At Allen University, where Winter had once dominated the basketball court, a heavy silence hung over the campus. The gymnasium, a place where her energy had once electrified the court, now felt emptier. Former teammates spoke about her leadership, the way she pushed them to be better, not just as athletes, but as people. Coaches who had watched her grow from a determined high school student into a fierce competitor recalled the fire she carried in every game. She had been a champion, both on and off the court. The impact of her death was not limited to those who had played alongside her. Professors and faculty members who had watched her excel academically, sorority sisters who had shared in her passion for service, and colleagues at the South Carolina Department of Corrections who had witnessed her dedication to mental health work. All of them were left with a void that could never truly be filled. Her co-workers at the Broad River Secure Facility, where she had worked as a mental health officer, found it particularly difficult to process what had happened. Winter had been more than just a colleague. She had been a bright spot in an environment often filled with darkness. She had walked through those prison doors every day with a sense of purpose, determined to help those who had been cast aside by society. She had seen the humanity in people others had long given up on. And now, she was gone. In the days following her death, tributes poured in. Friends flooded social media with messages of love, sharing memories of her infectious laughter, her unwavering support, and the kindness that defined her. Her sorority sisters from Delta Sigma Theta posted heartfelt words honoring the legacy of a woman who had embodied everything their organization stood for: scholarship, service, and sisterhood. One of the most painful realities for those left behind was the fact that there had been no warning signs. Winter's mother, LaShawn Williams, had trusted Renardo Johnson. She had believed, as so many others did, that he was a good man, a man who loved her daughter. The betrayal cut deep. In interviews, she spoke with the raw pain of a mother who had lost something irreplaceable, questioning how someone she had welcomed into her family could be the same person who had taken Winter's life. The tragedy of it all was suffocating, Winter had been working toward a future that was now permanently out of reach. She had dreams beyond what she had already achieved. She had talked about going to law school, about continuing to make a difference in the world. She had plans that would never be realized. But in the wake of such devastating loss, something else began to emerge. A determination to ensure that Winter's story would not be forgotten. Her family, her friends, her community. They refused to let her name fade into a statistic. They would fight to make sure that her death was not in vain. And as they began to organize vigils, memorials, and public calls for change, a powerful message took shape, one that would resonate far beyond the city of Columbia. In the days following Winter Straw's tragic death, the mourning community that had once been filled with vibrant laughter, energy, and hope began to slowly rebuild itself in the wake of loss. But through the overwhelming sorrow, Winter's family and close friends found themselves united by a single, powerful mission: to make sure her life, her dreams, and the lessons from her untimely death were never forgotten. Her mother, LaShawn Williams, stood at the forefront of this mission. Her grief was raw and unrelenting, but amidst it a fierce resolve took hold. She spoke openly about the devastation of losing her daughter, but her message wasn't just about the heartache of that loss. LaShawn began to channel her pain into a call to action. She wanted the world to understand what had happened to her daughter, but more than that, she wanted to prevent another family from enduring the same night. As the family began to make arrangements for Winter's funeral, the community rallied around them. Those who had known Winter, whether from her time at Allen University, her work at the Department of Corrections, or through her sorority, banded together, determined to honor her memory in a meaningful way. There were whispered plans to bring her story to the public, to make sure that her death wasn't a silent one, lost in the endless sea of domestic violence cases that often go unnoticed. The vigil held in Winter's honor at Carrington Place at Wildwood Apartments was a powerful reminder of the love and respect she had garnered throughout her life. Friends, family, and community members gathered to remember the woman who had been an inspiration to so many. They wore purple, symbolizing domestic violence awareness, a color that would come to represent both Winter's life and the cause that now drove her family to action. It was at that vigil that Winter's mother, LaShawn, spoke to the crowd. Her voice cracked with emotion, but there was a quiet strength in her words as she called for an end to domestic violence. "This isn't just about Winter," she said. "This is about every woman who feels trapped, every woman who feels scared, every woman who can't find a way out." Her plea resonated with those who heard it, the truth in her words undeniable. It was a moment that left no one untouched, a rallying cry for anyone who had ever witnessed or experienced the horrors of domestic violence. LaShawn's message was simple but powerful. Domestic violence is not a joke. It's not something we can ignore. We need to take it seriously. She called on others to listen, to hear the silent cries of those who may not yet have a voice, to recognize the signs of abuse before it's too late. And above all, she urged people to never turn a blind eye when they suspect something isn't right in someone's relationship. In the wake of the vigil, the community continued to honor Winter's life. The South Carolina Department of Corrections, where Winter had worked so tirelessly, decided to dedicate a memorial in her name, a purple bench placed outside the Broad River Secure Facility, symbolizing both Winter's dedication and her legacy. Her co-workers, many of whom had been deeply affected by her loss, stood together in a show of support. For them, Winter was more than just a colleague. She had been a friend, a mentor, and a beacon of hope in a challenging environment. Her family, still grieving, recognized that their efforts weren't just about commemorating Winter's memory. They were part of a larger movement, one that sought to shed light on the often hidden realities of domestic violence. They wanted to educate others, to ensure that people could see the warning signs, understand the complexity of these situations, and take action before things escalated. Winter's death became a catalyst for change. Her mother, her friends, and even her co-workers began working together to create awareness and drive conversations about domestic violence. They used Winter's story to fuel their efforts, sharing it with as many people as they could in the hopes that it might help save another life. In the months that followed, Winter's family saw an outpouring of support from both within their community and across the country. People began reaching out to share their own stories that mirrored Winter's in ways they hadn't anticipated. And as these voices came together, a collective resolve formed, one that would honor Winter's memory, but more importantly, one that would fight to ensure that other lives would not be lost the way hers had been. Her legacy, defined not just by her accomplishments, but by the impact she had on everyone she met, would live on, not in the quiet spaces where people forget, but in the voices that would rise up in her name. And as her family continued to mourn, they knew that their fight for justice, awareness, and change was just beginning. On April 23, 2023, the city of Columbia gathered to say goodbye to Winter Straw. It was a funeral that no one had ever imagined attending, a day that felt impossible for those who loved her. The church was filled with mourners, an overwhelming number of people who had been touched by Winter's life in one way or another. Family members, childhood friends, college teammates, sorority sisters, co-workers, and even those who had never met her but had been moved by her story. Every seat was occupied. The weight of grief hung heavy in the air. Her casket, surrounded by flowers, was a stark reminder of the future that had been stolen from her. Purple ribbons were worn by many in attendance, a tribute to her and the cause her family now championed: domestic violence awareness. As the service began, there was a silence that spoke louder than words. It was the silence of heartbreak, of people struggling to accept the reality that someone so full of life had been taken in such a cruel and violent way. As the service came to a close, there was an undeniable sense of loss, but also a powerful undercurrent of purpose. Winter's death would not be in vain. Her story would be told, her name would not fade, and her loved ones would ensure that no one ever forgot the young woman who had given so much to the world. Winter Straw's story is one that should have never ended this way. She had the kind of future people dream of, one filled with ambition, kindness, and the drive to make a real difference in the world. She wasn't just another statistic. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a woman who had worked tirelessly to uplift those around her. And yet, despite everything she had accomplished, despite the love and promise she carried with her, her life was stolen in an act of domestic violence. Her family will never get to see her achieve the dreams she had laid out for herself. They won't see her go to law school, walk down the aisle, or continue her career helping others. They won't hear her laughter at family gatherings or see the joy in her eyes when she spoke about the things she was passionate about. That's the cruel reality of domestic violence. It doesn't just take lives, it shatters the people left behind. But Winter's story doesn't have to end in silence. Her mother, her friends, her community, they have made it clear that they will not let her death be just another tragedy. They are fighting for change, pushing for conversations about domestic violence, and making sure that people recognize the warning signs before it's too late. They want her legacy to serve as a reminder that no one is immune, that domestic violence isn't always obvious, and that we must do more to protect those who are at risk. This is where you come in. If Winter's story has touched you, if you believe in the importance of spreading awareness, then take action. Share this video. Talk about her story. Keep her memory alive by making sure people know who she was and what she stood for. If you or someone you know is in an unsafe relationship, seek help. Don't wait for things to escalate. There are resources available, organizations that are ready to assist, and people who will listen. No one should suffer in silence. And if you want to support the work we're doing to share these important stories, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. These stories need to be heard, and by engaging with our content, you're helping ensure that victims like Winter are never forgotten. Winter Straw was more than what happened to her. She was a woman full of light, love, and promise. Let's make sure her story is remembered, not just as a tragedy, but as a call to action for change. Rest in peace, Winter. Your voice will never be silenced.